Oh, I'm happy to be here in Baltimore. Part of my story, I immigrated to this country several decades ago, and my first harbor was the Baltimore harbor. Coming from a ship taken from South Atlantic to the North Atlantic, take 1 month, but I was researching mysteries. I having experience also in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. And I remember the sailor said, well, what I was showing one of my first documentaries on UFOs was called Skylights, Luces en el Cielo. And after when we were kind of passing the coast of Brazil, entering the Puerto Rican waters and the Bermuda Triangle, the ship kind of broke down. And we spent two days in the darkness. But finally I make it to Baltimore. I am here. I always was a kind of a curious child, and it's not casualty. It's a kind of, I was a chaser of miracles and exploring mysteries all my life, at least the last 40 years. And now we are in the time, it's incredible, our humanity is so curious. Our people and all nations, they want to know more. And many people are not, it's the thirstiness of knowledge is so big. And growing up, I was interested in natural science, and I was part of a museum of natural science, and I like to study the behavior of animals, ethology. But also, I was start to have this interesting to know where we were coming from, where we are going. Is possible the evolution of the human mind, and we are alone or we are not alone. And I was kind of converging my curiosity. I used to have a Jesuit uncle who was a kind of my first mentor, and he was very troublemaker. He was a really troublemaker and a political, yeah. He was a priest confessor of Evita Peron in the time, in the 50s. He was kind of, and I used to visit him, and he introduced me to the Thaller de Chardin theories and to the cosmology, and also to the mystery of the Marian apparitions, kind of as an uprising as a Catholic boy. I was converging, and I started to find so many connections. And the first kind of interesting was really we could get the proven evidence. We are not alone. In the past, we have some visitations. We really have a contact as in the historical perspective and also in the spiritual one. And now is that conversion we have today with the paradigm of the UFO phenomenon, the extraterrestrial life, the astrophysics. Many lines are converging, and to see we are not really alone. Or maybe we never been alone. Being the planet Earth, a kind of a living creature, and we start to perceive so many dimensions. And I wrote my early book was about the parallel dimensions when I was almost a teenager, and that I converged the search in underground worlds and another kind of worlds who are here. There are many worlds, as the poet Paul Eluard used to say. There are many worlds in the universe, but they are inside. They are here and inside of us. And my search bring me, well, many of these stories. If you saw the show Ancient Aliens, I brought it to the first 2 seasons, and they're still kind of using that in the new seasons. And paleocontact is a terminology used more in the late 50s by writers, mostly in Europe and Russia. The paleocontact terminology comes from astronomer and researcher Zaitsev. Within the 50s, they were kind of creating this line of called fantastic realism. And they were science, and they were visionaries, they were poets, but in special was one of the pioneers. Now everybody talk about Erich von Däniken, but was was a gringo named George Hunt Williamson. Yeah, from California, yes. Sure. And George Hunt Williamson in the 50s, he converged archaeology and geology, biblical studies, and also archaeology. And he's the first one, for example, he started to talk about the Nazca Lines as possible airstrip and to really describe many other secret places around the world and to see if, and to try to find evidence. And also he was a kind of ufologist who was trying to contact through the mind civilizations in the space. And unfortunately, he was not credited, and is totally forgotten, no? As an American pioneer. And one of my first, I always want to find this place, is Valcamonica Valley, when in the classical books on 1960s, Peter Colosimo, Robert Charroux, they always really print the picture in the left about these figures floating and with rays coming from the head. In this Valcamonica Valley, there are kind of rock paintings, but there are 5,000 years old. And it's a very beautiful valley with also was a collision, a meteorite impact 12,000 years ago, according to one professor of the University of Bergamo, Dr. Spedicato. And these two figures, I did one expedition. It was covered, was the springs, all the spring in Italy. It's very flashy and kind of very green. I couldn't find it. Finally, my second expedition in autumn, I found the two figures would only people in the 60s have the chance to photograph. But this is a kind of the calco. And you see this figure with all the helmets and the rays coming out. We don't know the type of instruments. The official version talk about they were kind of warriors in the dancing warrior scene. But we found all this connection. Well, this is the original one. And they are not too big. You could see myself is below my hand, and there are small ones. And all the figures, there are more than 100,000 figures in all the valley and another section called the Petra Magna. And they show these kind of structures who are kind of rockets with 3 stages. And we don't know if they were dwellings or kind of this type of aerodynamics. And we found this in the old times with this kind of helmets. Yeah. And we know the fascination with the skies. This is one of the first medieval representation of called the false grave of the 3 wise men. The 3 wise men, they were originally buried in Italy, not in the Cathedral of Cologne, Germany. But this was original placement. And well, the Italians, they were very fascinated. They were very fascinated with the stars. This is one of the first interpretations of stargazers, what is in the Museum of Rome. This is my picture too. And my story starts in this hill. It's called the Cerro Colorado, Cordoba, Argentina, with these Indians who were fair-skinned bird Indians. They paint the more advanced constellations of the sky of the southern hemisphere. This was one of my first pictures of the rotating sun, and the ancient cultures represent always the sun with arms and legs, the rotating. Well, we were talking about the Nazca Lines. This is a picture I took in my first trip. The impression is very kind of, you are going to descend in a modern airport, but these are a couple thousand years old, and you could see it only from the high altitude. When you walk there, maybe you don't see the lines. And this is interesting, but we found in all South America this kind of, we could call ley lines, and in many of the important monuments. Well, this is near the Equatorial line in the Cochasquí pyramids in Ecuador, and this mark the sunset, but also there are more, the activate, we could say, in solstice and equinoxes. And the curious thing is the concrete you see is baked kind of dirt. It's one of the few ancient groups, the Quituscaras Indians of North Quito, who, to decorate the floor also with constellations and stars, they bake the ground. It's a big mystery. And the interesting also, all the monuments of the pyramids, they are connected with the Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. And in Peru too, in Paracas, the textiles of Paracas show flying creatures, flying kind of figures, and it's a big kind of polemics now, controversy regarding some mummies they found with 3 fingers, and they said, well, the ancestors of the pre-Incas were this advanced civilization who came and the cross-hybridization of our Andean cultures. But no, I analyzed all the textiles and we found 5 fingers. But sometimes we found 6 fingers. The famous Bogota, Colombia Museum of Gold have these little planes who still, we don't know if they are a representation of a species of birds or there are advanced craft. And it's very kind of curious to see this type of aerodynamical figures. Another statue I found in the Mayan land is this part of individual with goggles, this type of goggles. And the official archaeologists represent the Venus figure. They represent as a female kind of goddess. But the interesting thing, the figure have a kind of, is tied to a kind of a column, but it's kind of pregnant. They have a mirror in the front, and his suit, a spacesuit, is kind of a flying suit, is coming all covered by feathers. And in the side, he have 2 kind of discs, in the 2 stars, and they say it was a flying kind of individual. Well, we know the Mayans left a lot of mysteries behind. And the same type of goggles on the eyes we found in the Coricancha, the sun disk. This sun disk is a reproduction, was mailed by the Spanish conquistadores when they took Cusco and they destroyed that fantastic place. The Temple of Santo Domingo now is constructed above the observatory. It was an observatory and combining kind of rituals, religious rituals, and an advanced stone kind of a computer type of walls and doors coming out as a protuberance from the walls to mark and to study the stars. And along all the Americas, we have this connection with the Burmans, with the figures. And the legends and the traditions converge with these monuments. The interesting observation of many of the researchers who trying to explain how they move these movements, how they cut the stones. We are talking about tons of kind of with many, many, many levels of height, and to construct cities, as I was mentioning, in Peru, in Cusco, and well, I'm going to talk about the pyramids a little bit and later. And today, with the science and of construction, we cannot reproduce this. But some of the alternative theories, they start to discover the ancients. They have the technique to kind of dissolve the rocks, to create artificial blocks. In the case of Egypt, we have a lot of new elements, and either the Egyptians and the Incas have drilling machine, and also they have the technique to soft the rocks, and today is the only explanation they could have so much perfections to kind of in this castration of every rock. This figure is part of the Tula Lake Indians, the Pitt River, and it's kind of a bird figure. And if you start to analyze, we found faces who are seen in certain times of the year. I call it optical carvings. Many of these carvings were used, they were using kind of an advanced techniques. And for example, you could see in one side the profile of Eagleman, and in the left side, more a feline figure. And also in Mesoamerica and South America, we found these, the two animals, the bears and the jaguars, the pumas, the lions, they were always present. As well, in Bolivians, Pampa de Aullagas, what is called the New Atlantis, what is the myth of Atlantis. You could find it in many places. You found it in Greece, you found it in the Atlantic, you found it in Antarctica. One British geologist, cartographer, Jim Allen, found these concentric circles in this area of Bolivia. And also I found figures who represent very similar to the type of costumes you find in the Aymara and Quechua Indians. Here is the Gate of Sun, Puerta del Sol, Tiahuanaco. Tiahuanaco is kind of very famous for recent programs, and is kind of some theories, they are dating the chronology in 12,000 years old, starting with Poznański, who was the first researcher, the Polish researcher, who made a monumental work. Also, ulterior researchers, as Bellamy and Allen, two British geologists in the 40s and 50s, they corroborate that was a kind of an astronomical dial connected with the planet Venus. But today we don't know too much, but Venus was very important in the firmament and its representations. This is a very interesting topic. I discovered this story in 2009. Friends in Chile, they found this entity who was recently studying the University of Stanford, and to prove it was really was a fetus, really was a living individual, and was found in a strata of the 1900s and in a mining area, and was it's still baffling the science. but this also is parallel to the myth of the Gentiles, los Gentiles. In the Andes, we have this tradition, and the story is still alive, still living, about these creatures who live underground, but they are interacting with agriculture and with the people today. And this is very interesting. The elongated skull is connected with recent findings and recent analysis of the DNA of the Paracas skulls. And the Paracas skulls, they are connecting with a kind of a current of immigration many thousand years ago, but through Europe and Eurasia. And regarding to this being, we know the conclusion of the Stanford researcher is this creature was not kind of a person who didn't really work. This is Mexico. We found many of these structures. Palenque was the god Pacal, a figure with was more giant figure. We go from the small figures to bigger size. Then there, Egypt, we found this. We cannot explain how the Egyptians decorate the tombs, the graves, and the pyramid with so many inscriptions. And they really have another kind of undisclosed way to illuminate it, but they didn't use fire, they didn't use kind of any reflection of mirrors as the official science done. Well, in the future, maybe after a nuclear war, if they found obelisks in the center of Central Park, they will not really, they will see what the Egyptians were living in New York. This one of, I think, the type of logic and deductions we do today with all these artifacts, displays of time and space. And many times the nature have this simulacra and this kind of phase of a grade in Fontainebleau forest. And in the past, in the medieval times, we found all this kind of interrelation between spiritual beings and humans. Archangels, angels, they interact as with the common layman. I studied a very interesting case in Italy with the police, the director of the custom police in this town called Tirano. One of a person, well, the chief of police is an ufologist, but he keep it kind of in the side and he doesn't want to talk too much. And he's in charge also of the custom police in the border between Italy and Switzerland. And one lady friend, she had a dream about Saint Catherine. You know, Saint Catherine, who was martyrized in the wheel as one of the first Catholic Christian martyrs. It's represented in the Catholic and the Christian lore with her wheel in her side. And she had a dream. And the next morning in her patio, this kind of wheel was materialized in the dew on the morning. This kind of image kind of survived a couple hours before melt. This was in the autumn. And this picture was taken that morning. And I researched it the same week. And as we could see, the level, the mystery of the human conscious and the subconscious connect with our perception of heavens and earth. And the Knight Templars, they carved this fantastic petroglyph mural in the center of England, and we have the representation of Saint Catherine, and also the knights with the cross and the sword. And next to the sword, we always found this kind of image, as you could see below, the sword and the sun rotating, whirling, as you could see this part. And it's interesting, our planet Earth has many ley lines, and these ley lines, beyond, we found this kind of mystery lines, as John Michel used to, my good friend John Michel used to call it. And along these lines, geographical lines, we connect these, the countries as Spain, France, Italy. This is the Tor, the Glastonbury Tor. And according to the researchers, the Michael line and the Mary line converge and continue south, and they pass through many churches. And along the churches, we found these figures also with helmets and astronauts. This is a kind of an angel with a helmet in the church of Aralar, north of Spain. And another subject, very interesting subject, I research, and I start to be kind of curious, and really kind of put me in the jack, in the maid of, in the, what is the, how I couldn't explain, the doubt of faith, being educated as a Catholic, is trying to review the Fatima apparitions. The Virgin Mary of Fatima showed up to these three shepherds in 1917, and we are celebrating 100 years of that appearance. But two historians, Joaquin Fernandez and Fina de Armada, they went to the archives of Portugal, Lisbon and Oporto, and they found, and Fatima, and they found the real appearance of the being who was contacting the shepherds. And they described also with a kind of a glass helmet holding a ball of light, this cushion dress similar to the one I showed in the Mayan figure. And also there were many elements who are very similar to how the witness describe their encounters with entities, or with UFOnauts or humanoids. These are the real photos of the miracle of the sun. The Virgin was also described as very, very short. The new reconstructions was a kind of only 3 feet tall. And she promised a miracle, and after 6 months, the last apparition, the sun started to dance. We know astronomical is impossible, but some kind of researchers said was not really the sun, but was a kind of a UFO. And the clouds covered the real sun, and a kind of a metallic object started to spin in their axis, producing a lot of rainbows and change of colors. And the crowd was more than 30,000 people. Their clothes were kind of very wet. And in a few minutes, the clothes dry. And this is the second picture with we saw some kind of circular objects on the horizon. In 1978, I researched this UFO case during the big flap of the Argentinian South American hemisphere. In United States, the big UFO flap, who was one of the bigger in history, with radar detection, with official kind of witness, policemen and military. They were seeing this kind of object producing a beam of light. And inside of the beam of light was coming two figures. And the two humanoids, they have a kind of a light in the chest coming from the heart. And according to Jacques Vallée, he wrote the foreword to the English edition of the book, talking about this case I reconstruct. And we know these objects representing an ancient, medieval, and Renaissance paintings show this kind of cigar shapes, what contain sometimes ball of light, metallic light, as this image, this previous image, was taken in Chile, in Punta Arenas. Regarding with the sun, well, it's kind of.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
You have so much to share.
Yeah, well, it's coming all the medieval
okay?
things.
Okay, if we could just do a few more of that, then.
It's not working.
Because we were out about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah?
Is it not working?
No.
Okay, could you go through them very quickly then? They
Yeah.
can't, this isn't being used anymore. Eric, can you progress them, please?
Go next. Go. This figure I found it with explorers Jean Savoy, who was the greatest archaeologist, who discovered all the Chachapoya cities along in Peru. South America is a kind of a figure who represent a vessel with the light coming from there. Oh.
Is it working again?
Yes. I know it's going. We could find in modern art, for example, in the Mission District in San Francisco, this representation of encounters of the Maido Indians in Northern California and today. Well, the recent eclipse produced kind of visions of in many places in US and in other countries, and the people start to see figures, some good, some bad, omen figures. And one of my interesting pictures in the past, this is the Chanin Monastery in Yugoslavia, who represent this kind of spaceships. In the Italian art, this Annunciation of Crivelli, kind of a saucer produced a beam of light to the Virgin Mary. Botticelli, always we found all these discs, yellow discs, where the angels come from. And the yellow disc is kind of common. This is the Virgin of Palazzo Vecchio, where we found this very intriguing figure. And the witness. The painters of the time, they always were very conscious of the role of the witness. This guy is looking at the object. The dog is also looking there. Yeah, and here is well, you could see the surprise. It's a very masterpiece, no? And this is the Baptism of Christ, a painting of a Dutch painting with a beam of light coming from the saucer in direction to the painting. This is 16th century painting. Oh. This is a photo, a recent photo of Russia. We could see the analogy between the object. Yeah. This is a Saltimbeni figure with, it's really a satellite, and we cannot explain. Maybe if it was in a space-time gap or kind of a porthole or vortex, maybe the people in the 16th century saw the Sputnik. Here is the Sputnik, and it's identical, no? And we analyze, and the satellite have a lot of device and kind of with figures, very mysterious, yeah. We have these kind of figures, and I think Elton Max will be happy. What we could see these rockets launch into the sky, kind of to intercept. It's kind of a Star Wars, a Comics War. It's a painting also from Crivelli, the Madonna and the baby. And you see clouds could acquire this kind of form of UFOs. That's this De La Robbia painting. We have in an old Renaissance, yeah. This is the miracle of the snow. Never snow in Italy, but the Pope of that time, he had a dream and said, if something comes from the sky, you will have to build a church. And this painting from the 1500 represent this kind of miracle, snowing. But sometimes it snowed. 2 weeks ago, it snowed in Rome. A second. Well, let me see that. Okay.
I was looking at